Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stoof, and this is a painting of a little white cottage by a pond. And then I was contemplating making this a live stream, so I put a poll out on my community tab page and asked you guys what you would rather see, if you'd rather see a live stream of this painting process, or if you'd like me to create the painting, edit out the boring stuff, and then make a edited video in real time of the painting. And the results were 50-50 exactly. So I made the executive decision to just go with the edited version of this. So here is your edited video. All right, getting started, let's look at our paints. Today we have acrylic paints. These are my Liquitex Basics acrylics. They're not the heavy body, they're just like regular cost-efficient acrylic paints here, and we have phthalo green, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, Naples yellow, primary yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium yellow medium, titanium white, we're gonna need a lot of that, burnt umber, sap green, magenta, sky blue or periwinkle blue, black, and a raw sienna or a burnt sienna. One of those two would work. Okay, for our paint brushes today, I just have a blend of brushes here. Let's throw in a fine brush too. So I have a fine flat tip brush, a angled flat brush, that's a larger size, two kind of rounder brushes that are about, medium if we're going fine to thick here, and then a few in the middle that are all flat tipped or angled brushes. I also have a cup of water here for cleaning off my brushes, and I have some paper towels for wiping the excess paint off my brushes and cleaning up the mess that I make every time I paint. So when I start a painting, I always start out by sketching the scene with thin downed paint. So we're going to start with our fine flat tip brush, and I'm going to dip this in the water, and then I'm just going to dip it in. Let's dip it in the brown. Doesn't really matter what color you use here. You could probably want to use a darker color though, just so you can see what you're sketching. So I'm looking at a reference photo here. I'm just going to start by putting a little crosshair in the center, just so that when I look at my reference photo, I can see what is in the center in that photo, and then what is in the center on my canvas. If you guys are recreating this painting, you're going to do the same thing by looking at my picture and seeing where center is when you recreate it and put your sketch down on your painting. So we're going to start with just a little line here for the nice lake, pond, and the pond comes down, so if you make a little cross here, and this is a 45-degree angle, it's going to come down in between those two, kind of like that. So that's the angle for the pond coming towards the foreground. And then in the background here, it just kind of starts to slope down very slightly. So maybe like a 10 to 15 degree angle from there. Okay, and then we have some grasses right around the pond. So I'm just gonna put a line here for now. We are gonna have grasses like this. So if you wanna do something like this, just to remember that that's gonna be grass, then you can do that. Some big grasses in the foreground here. So I'll just make a couple little back and forth brush strokes, kind of making like little curve patterns to show that that's going to be our tall grass. And then I'm going to put a rock, just put a couple little rocks on the side here. Put another big rock, like right there. And we'll throw a couple more little rocks right over here. So these rocks are going to be much smaller. So this rock's a couple inches, and this rock is less than 1 inch. This is a 12 by 16 inch canvas panel. So that gives you an idea of reference for what size painting I'm using here. Yeah, so we're just adding a couple of rocks. This helps to build the distance by just making rocks different sizes. All right, that looks nice. What else can we add here? I think maybe I'll start moving farther into the background. So we're going to have a house, and the house we want to focus on having the correct angles. So for the house, first I'm looking at, first of all, the house doesn't come past center, so I already went a little too far with that. It comes right to about center, and this is the roof. Comes down on this side a little bit farther in from that horizontal line. Then we're going to have some hedges kind of in front of the house here. And then we have steep roof. And if we're looking at our perspective here, the perspective point where these are going to meet is somewhere off of the canvas. So thinking about that gives us a better idea of what angle we want to use for that. Our perspective for this one, we actually can fix this line to be a little bit more horizontal. And then this line is like, this point is about right there. So if you draw an imaginary line here, it would look something like that. Then we're just going to put a little line right there, just slightly, dipping down very slightly. There. And we have a couple windows. We have a little window on the roof. And we'll do a little window right there. And we'll do another window there, and we'll do a window about right there. And then we have a nice little chimney. And another little chimney. All right, so there's the sketch of the little house. We're gonna be making some adjustments to that later too. Gonna add a few more little plants back here. Maybe I'll add a little bush or something right there. Some flowers, we can add flowers to that. Okay, and then we're gonna move up to the tree line. So I'm just gonna do like a wavy little line here for our trees, and then we're gonna have some more bushes like here. We'll just do a little row of like arborvitae or something like that. And got a few more trees starting to be visible back here. So I'm just kind of starting to add some like circles with like bulgy shapes just to start to kind of make it seem like we have a forest behind the house, very roughly sketching it out. And then we're gonna have some bigger bushes and plants on this side. So let's do like a pine tree right here. And we'll just continue more of the forest, like right there. All right, and then in the pond, we're just gonna have reflections of everything that's already out. So we're gonna have reflections of the pine tree, and it's just gonna be the opposite, like a mirror image of what you have above. And the pond's gonna be like a little bit wavy, so it's not gonna be a perfect reflection, but it helps to sketch it out first just to make sure you're putting things in the right place and getting about the right angles. There's our sketch. Now we can rinse off the small brush that we just sketched everything out with, and I'm going to switch to this large angled brush, and we're going to use some phthalo blue with white, and I'm going to mix some periwinkle blue in there. If you don't have periwinkle blue, ultramarine blue should work too. And you just want to get it to a nice light blue like that and completely cover up the top of the painting. Just making back and forth brush strokes. You want to get a good even coverage of paint on the canvas. And the bigger brush you use, the more quickly you'll be able to cover the space. All right, now we're going to take some white while that paint is still wet, and I'm just going to add that white at the bottom and let that blend up. There we go. And maybe let's add a little bit of phthalo blue and black. A little more periwinkle. We'll just add that up at the top real quick and darken up the top of the sky. You definitely don't have to do that. I think I'm not feeling the black that I added in there, so I'm taking that out by just mixing phthalo blue and white and putting that down. There we go. Okay. So we'll let the sky dry and then we'll add some clouds. But while we're waiting for that to dry, let's work on the base color for this tree line in the background. So I'm taking some sap green and some black. I'll take a little phthalo blue too. And I'm just gonna hold this angled brush so that the steep part of the angle is kind of facing up and covering up the sky that we just did. And I'm loosely like dabbing the paintbrush so that it can give us the look of like the tops of trees. And it's gonna blend a little bit with the background color that you put down. If you put down a lot of paint, then it's really gonna blend. So we can always come back to that and add another layer over top. For now, we're just kind of trying to get a base color down so we know what we're working with when we start to add more detail. All right, take a little more ultramarine blue and brown. Got a little bit more of a shadow. Or sorry, that's phthalo blue. Got a little more of a shadow down here. And just bring that down to the base where we get into the little bushes right by the house. Yeah, let's get more more phthalo blue with sap green and burnt umber. Let's just make this really dark right here, deep shadows. If you add more brown and sap green, that's going to be warmer, and if you add more phthalo blue, then it's going to be a cooler shadow. Alright, I'm going to take a little more sap green and burnt umber, and I'm going to take a little bit of burnt or raw sienna and a little hint of white too, just to lighten that up so it can separate from that tree that I just put down the shadows for. Still make sure you're not leaving any white space. Go right up behind these little bushes I put in. All right, then for the bushes, let's just take some sap green with our burnt sienna, and we'll make them that color for now so that they stand out from the background enough. And then for the grasses, we're gonna take even more burnt or raw sienna, some yellow ochre. Let's do more yellow ochre. And we'll take a little bit of cadmium yellow medium. And that's just gonna go right around. So now I'm holding this large angled brush at an angle to get a thinner line. You could switch to a different brush now if you would like. If you have a different brush, that would work. And I'm also gonna just paint this section with that color and take some of my phthalo green and my sap green, color this bush with that color, and the ones right behind and in front of the house. So I'm just trying to get some different base colors for my greens here, just to make sure all of my greens are kind of standing out from one another and not blending in. Now I'm taking some yellow and I'm blending it right into that green combo, adding some white. And we're gonna use that. That's a little too much, so I'm gonna add some, I'm adding some ultramarine blue to tone that down a little bit. It's a little too vibrant. Here we go. Still pretty vibrant, but that's okay. Now I filled in that space. So we got base color down for the greens. Now let's work on these reflections in the pond. So going back to this color with the raw sienna, let's take a little bit of phthalo green and some burnt umber. Use more burnt umber. Let's try some Naples yellow and some more raw sienna. You want it to be pretty close, just a little bit darker than what you currently have in the actual land. You want the reflection just to be slightly darker and cooler. And I want this one to be bigger. Since it's getting closer to the foreground, we need this to be bigger. There we go. All right, I'm gonna clean this brush off. And I'm gonna switch to this medium flat tip brush and I'm gonna work on the sky reflection first. So I'm mixing my phthalo blue with white. And I'm gonna mix a little bit of ultramarine blue in there too. Just to make it a little bit cooler than what we already got. And a little bit of white because we have some clouds down here that are going to make it into the painting. And I'm making back and forth brush strokes here, and I'm keeping it a little choppy, not making a perfect smooth blend of highlight and shadow. Because it's water, it's gonna have like ripples in it and stuff, so we can leave it looking like that. All right, now I'm gonna work back in that shadow green color, take some sap green, some phthalo green, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. You can use that for this. And you want to work somewhat quickly here because these things are going to start drying. So I just covered up where my rocks were, but I'm going to bring them back later. So hopefully I don't forget that I had rocks. But you want to work quickly with these shadows as you're building the color up in the water because you have to blend these colors together. And since we're using acrylic paint that dries more quickly, we have to work a little bit more quickly. Getting that deep reflection shadow from this. Using my burnt umber and phthalo blue. I'll add a little phthalo, or a little bit of a sap green in there too. Let's take some white, black, and some raw umber. A little more white, a little more raw umber. And we'll just add a little rock right there. And I can't forget about that rock. And I'll add my couple other rocks here. Very good, now we don't forget those. All right, let's work on the roof. So I just cleaned off my brush to get the green off of there. Now we're gonna take some burnt or raw sienna, mix it in with our white and black. And you could make this roof really any color. I'm gonna add a little hint of magenta, a little hint of that periwinkle blue, and we'll get this nice earthy gray brown color. And first you just kind of sketch, use the brush right along the edges to define the edges a little better. Make sure you're not leaving any white space. And once you get the borders, make sure you have nice crisp edges. You don't want to have soft or rounded edges here. You want to have harsh lines. So once you get those edges, then you just fill in the space right there. And if your green is still a little bit wet behind there, then we can always come back and add another layer. And then we're going to have a shadow under that, so I'm going to take some black and some burnt umber and just add a shadow. Nice straight line, kind of helps define this line a little bit better as well. Same thing on this side. All right, now I'm going to rinse off that brush. Well, you know what? While we have those colors still, let's throw that down in the water so we don't have to remix that color, even though I already do. So just follow the same points, make a straight line down, like without actually touching the canvas, and then you'll see where those two lines should meet for the reflection. Make sure those basically match up. And then this one's gonna go out that way, so make sure you have a nice straight line there. And the reflection one doesn't have to be as perfect and jagged because we are going to blend it. So once you get that down, then just take your brush and softly press the canvas and let it kind of blend in with the colors already in the water. Gonna make a line right here too. And let that blend in. All right, now the cottage is like a little white creamy color, and that's why I grabbed that Naples yellow. So I'm getting a really good clean brush here. So I'm taking some white and some Naples yellow. I think I got a little too much Naples, so I'm gonna go back to the white. So we're gonna make this part of the house have that super bright highlight. And again, if you want to switch to a smaller brush to have a little bit better control, you can do that. Whenever you get to that shadow where we put that dark line, let it blend a little bit. And then this side's in shadow, so for this side we're just going to take a little burnt umber and do a little periwinkle blue. A little more periwinkle. Okay, we want it to be lighter than the roof. So make sure it's lighter than your roof and it's still a little cool from the bit of periwinkle blue that you added. And you can just pull this down all the way and pretend like those windows aren't there for a second. Then if you want to darken things up more, just add a little bit of black and periwinkle blue. You can go right up to that dark shadow you had. Just going over that again. And then right at your corner, you want to darken up that contact just a little bit too. All right, same thing with the reflection. If you want to cool down the highlight side a little bit, you can. All right, and then you can kind of blend this out again. Just do a couple little zigzags with your brush over everything in the water. So now we're ready to add some detail to the painting. So I'm gonna switch to this kind of semi-round brush, medium-sized brush. Take some white and get it all nice and good coverage on the brush without too thick of an application. And I'm just making little swirly patterns, kind of pressing the paint into the canvas. I don't have too much paint on the brush. I just have like a good little coverage, enough to get some paint onto the canvas. Right here maybe. So now it's more of a dry brush. I don't have very much paint left on the brush here. I'm just kind of scooping it around. We can also take the brush when it's wet and just get the paintbrush wet and get a little tiny dab of paint on there, and then you can just make these crisscross patterns like some really high clouds. And take a little more white. Keep building up these clouds right here. And then we'll take some ultramarine blue and some periwinkle blue and a hint of burnt umber. And then we'll blend in some white too, just to bring that up a notch. Add a little more white. It's not super contrasty here today. And just put that on the underside of the cloud, kind of pushing into the canvas again, working in some little shadows. Only on these puffy clouds. You don't need that for the cirrus type clouds, stratus, whatever those are called, cirrus I think. All right, now we got our clouds in there. You want to add a little bit of a reflection of the clouds in the water. So you don't have to do the actual cloud, but just make like add a little white in there so we know that there's something going on there. You can dip it in the water too to make it a little bit easier to blend. Now we have a little bit better of a reflection of the sky. So we're gonna keep using our medium brush. If you wanna use a finer brush, you're just gonna be able to get more detail. So I'm not going too detailed on this one. But if you wanna go with more detail, then switch to a fine brush instead of this little medium semi-round brush. All right, so we have burnt umber, magenta, ultramarine blue. And that's gonna go on this little tree here. I'm just kind of dabbing the brush, not physically dragging it, just dabbing it again to further refine those little marks at the top of it. And this one kind of goes right behind the house. It's got more purples and blues in it. And then kind of carry this back down into the water and drag it around. That's when you actually drag it, not dab it. And then that will give us a little bit more of the watery look. Let's go to this one. It's going to have more phthalo green and yellow ochre, and Naples yellow. And we'll start to add some highlights on there. So same thing, just kind of dab. And start to make like little mound shapes. You can add another little highlight on top of that, just adding a little bit more white to the color you already had. Just kind of making like little bumps, ridges. And then we can add another little shadow while we're working there, just mixing ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt umber, and some phthalo green. Just put your shadows under your big highlights. A couple of them make it to the top, but most of the shadows are down lower. And then could add some shadow in here. Just gonna go under these rocks real quick. Add a little bit of a shadow. All right, now we're mixing some phthalo green, some raw sienna, some yellow ochre, and some white. And that's gonna go right over here. So we just wanna start blending a couple different colors for every batch of trees. Every little tree back here is gonna get a little bit different color, just so that they all kind of stand out and they're not all the same color. Add a little bit more white and yellow for this one, and keep making those little U shapes that are creating our little highlights. And then let's see, down here, a little bit of black with the colors we just had, and we're gonna put this part's all in shadow, so we just want to make like a cool highlight for the section that's in the shadows. So I mixed a little bit of both of my blues in there, and see how that just cools it right down, but we can still add some little branches and stuff so it's not super flat there. Same thing with this one, we just take a little bit more. That's still kind of a highlight, but if we take a little bit more brown and blue, then it dulls it down. Add a little highlight there. I'm going to take a little bit of umber with my gray and just touch up that roof color again. And all right, that's good. Now let's move over to this tree over here. I'm going to use more white, primary yellow, and I just keep making new little color sections in an already existing color section on my palette. So I'm just manipulating the color slightly by adding a little bit more yellow and white, or a little bit more green, to change it from the color that we already used for the tree before it. Now we're going to add a little more phthalo blue, phthalo green. And there's just that little color value difference, but it makes the trees stand out more. And we've got more phthalo green and some umber down here. It's almost like shorter little trees there. And then I do want to still have a dark shadow down in the bottom. So I'll put that there again. Take some Naples yellow, some white, And we'll just start adding some of these colors down in the water. I added a bit of water to the paint to thin it down some. And you gotta have some shadows, colors in here too. Take a little more burnt umber. And now let's take some raw sienna white with the colors that we already had on the brush. More Naples yellow. And I'll take some primary yellow just to warm that up. Start to add these ones. Start overlapping our cloud a little bit. And I'm not making these like perfectly spaced, equally symmetrical, because you wouldn't see that in nature. Everything's a little bit different. And so if you're making your little bumps and highlights perfectly even, it's not going to look as realistic as it would if you just kind of let the brush jump around the canvas and have fun with it. Don't stress out too much about where to place your highlights and your shadows, because then it's not fun and then you get a little bit too caught up and you end up spending a lot of time on it. The best thing to do if you're starting to get frustrated with the painting is just keep working and just keep trying to get more and more coverage on it. And even if you're going in the wrong direction, as long as you keep working, like if this section is getting really irritating, then start working over here in a different section. And then often this section will start to come together and it makes this section look more realistic because this one got more work. So sometimes when it's frustrating on a painting, it's just because it's not done enough yet. All right, and then we're gonna have another one with more sap green and white. We'll add a little magenta to that too. And that one will go right here. Got some branches kind of coming out in all different directions on this one. And same thing in the reflection. Don't get too worked up about where you're placing your branches. As long as they're about the same size, then you're good. And you want to work a little bit more loosely. Just kind of drag the brush all around for the water part. It doesn't have to just be like dabbing like it is when you're painting on the non-water. Alright, we need a little bit of a middle value here, so I'm going to take some burnt umber with my raw sienna, yellow ochre, and just kind of go right up at the edge of these two, the border, and just kind of darken that contact just to separate these two trees a little bit more. Can add a little more shadow. These bottom ones should be a little bit more in shadow. So we'll just go over them with a little bit of burnt sienna mixed with, or burnt umber mixed with our, and I'll use some Naples yellow too. And I'm just gonna switch to my fine flat tipped brush. And we're just gonna go up, down, up, down, up, down. I'm not pressing too hard. I've watered down the paint to thin it down. You just want to go up and down, making a couple little layers of these up and down brush strokes until you get to your water contact line. If you'd like to use a liner brush here, you could use a liner brush, and that will give you even more detail. Same thing going down. Try to mirror what you have on the surface. And you can see it's thicker on this side and it gets thinner going out here as we're moving farther into the background. To here, basically. And we'll leave this. This is just like our initial highlight layer. There's some stuff behind it I still need to work on, but that just looks good to have a little something there. All right, now let's do these arborvitaes. So we're going to use our phthalo green and raw sienna with some yellow ochre, a little more phthalo green. Just want these to stand out again. So you just kind of make little pine trees here. They're just kind of like teardrop shapes, but we can't see the bottom of the teardrop. And then we take some more white with our yellow ochre. Still using the small brush. I'm just going to add a couple little highlights. We know our light source is kind of like up here in the sky over here, casting shadows on that side of the house. So it's this side of the tree is going to be a little bit lighter. So I'm just adding little highlights on the tree, just not completely covering up what I just painted, but creating those little lines of highlight. And if your paint's still too wet and it's blending, then you can wait and come back to this. All right, same thing with you gotta get the base in there and the reflection. And then a little highlight in the reflection. Working a little bit more loosely though with the highlight. So going back to the roof, we had a chimney. I'm gonna bring the chimney back using some burnt umber mixed with a little white. Putting that on this side. And then we'll just take some burnt umber and just make a little top of the chimney there. We're gonna have a little shadow, so I'm gonna mix some ultramarine blue with my burnt umber on this side. Just got the extra paint off my brush and I'm making it a little bit lighter, pressing lighter and making it not as dark of a shadow. Some black with my brown and put a little white in there too. Put a little yellow ochre in there too, just to make it less severe of a shadow, less intense. Just want that to be a nice soft little line. And there's some moss on the roof. We can just mix a little bit of our greens and the yellow ochre, and just hold the brush at an angle that like gives you lots of coverage, and just lightly press, and then press harder when you want more paint to get onto the canvas. Put a little bit more brown in there too, with some yellow ochre. And I think I want to get rid of the chimney that was there. I'll just leave the one little chimney. What else? We can do a little bit more with the roof. I'll just take a little bit more white in my burnt umber. I want it to be a little bit lighter than the roof. And just kind of start to add little textured marks. Just to make the roof a little more realistic. Just like it has like some shingles or some texture on it. And we got to add the moss to the bottom. All right, now let's do the little, let's add some plants right behind this house here. So I'm going to take some white and mix it with this green mixture I already have. You could make these any green, just make sure they're lighter than what we have in the forest. And add them in the reflection too. You can add another little highlight on top of those. All right, and then these bushes, let's get the windows back on the house first. So I'm just gonna start with black and brown and white and periwinkle blue, just to fill in the color. I'm gonna take the roof window out too, and we're just gonna put the two windows back here. You can put your windows wherever you want in your painting. All right, we got one on here, reflection. When you're painting the reflection of the windows, make sure you leave about the same amount of space from the top of the window to the roof and the reflection as you have in the main picture, and that might mean you have a little bit more of the base of the window showing, which we can fix later. But you want it to be pretty equal. Especially the size, make sure the size width of the windows is the same. And these have like a dark green color because they're just reflecting the trees that are around there. And then we can add a little highlight on there with some periwinkle blue and white. Just kind of like a little crisscross like that, just so it looks like glass. Do the opposite direction on the reflection. And then I'm going to quickly just go over this reflection to make it look more like water. Nice big door. You can make that door whatever color you'd like. I think I'll do like a pink door. And of course I put some brown down in there, so it's going to be a dark pink door. Or a neutral pink. Same thing with the reflection. Alright, going back to my ochre. I just want to touch up the grasses again to cover up that stuff. Alright, we also have some green in there that I forgot about. So let's take our Naples yellow, just blend that in with one of your greens. Can add a couple little highlights here. Oh, I guess this is more in shadow, so let's take some ultramarine blue with a little black. And we'll just put those there. You could make these be flowers too, that would look nice. Maybe I'll do that. Make sure you put that in the reflection part. Gotta darken that down. Should have a pretty deep shadow on it. And they're in shadow, so we need a little more magenta since it's a little cooler, and some ultramarine blue. And we could just add some pretty little flowers in there, just little dabs of color. Same thing in the reflection. Now let's do something with this area here. Let's take a little bit of our ultramarine blue and brown. Let me just define the edge of the pond again. A good little shadow line. Alright, let's add a little bit more right here. So let's take some more yellow with our phthalo blue and some white. Do some primary yellow. And this will be our highlighted green part. We can just put some like pretty little, maybe, we could do like some sunflowers or something. That would be nice. You know, these are not what sunflower stems look like. You can just put a couple in there. And add a little shadow on the back side of that too. Just adding a little shadow on this side where the grass is coming to the pond. Just put like blobs of cadmium yellow medium. And some brown. Now this is very basic. You guys can go into more detail for these if you want. I'm just kind of quickly trying to get a little more color in here. All right, and then over here, let's add some flowers in there too. It's gonna mix some Naples yellow in my phthalo blue and yellow ochre. Just put this one right here. Little bush. Add a shadow for that one. And we'll add another highlight. Let's get more Naples yellow and primary yellow. And just keep boosting those little highlights, very, very gently holding the brush. And then back here we need some highlight too. Want to have that nice grassy section right in front of the entrance. And start to add more white as you're moving closer to the foreground, more white and yellow. There we go. And we can add some more little shadows. Just kind of pushing the brush around. Trying to make it look like we're going back, farther away from the viewer. Gonna touch up this little shadow again, getting the paint wet to thin it down. Whoops. Go back to the grasses. So we're going to take more ochre, Naples yellow, some white, and just do another little round of highlights. And those ones on this side of the house are more in shadow, so we gotta darken those up with some burnt umber. Maybe a little bit of black in there too for the base. Can add a couple more little shadows in here on this side. And then another round of highlights. You can start to let some of these kind of curve down over the water. Just make sure you keep that in the reflection. All right, good. Now we've got our grasses up in the foreground here. So I'm gonna get these going here. Definitely much easier with a liner brush to get the detailed thin look, but like I said before, I'm not going too crazy with details here, so it's not a huge deal for me. But if you'd like to have more of a thin line here, then you could use a liner brush. Taking a little bit more raw sienna there. Just starting to build up this big section of grass. More yellow ochre and white. another little shadow on this rock. And let's add our other little rocks back into the picture. Add a rock right there. Rock there. A couple little rocks in here. I guess we need a little reflection of the rock too. And then our last step is going to be to just make the water look more ripply and realistic. So we're going to take some of this shadow color here. We're just going to kind of carry this out with some little lines. In there. And then we're going to take a little bit more sky color, which was just ultramarine blue with white. And like a hint of the periwinkle. And then we add some of that, kind of coming in on the tree part. Can add more white for little highlights. Just add these little dashes of paint. Then we're going to do some shadows, so we need some ultramarine blue with our phthalo blue and a little bit of brown. And that just goes on the underside of those little highlights that we did. And they're going to be a little bit larger and wider at the foreground of the pond and get darker. Going back to our shadow color again. Doing more of those little patterns. If you thin down your paint, you're going to get smoother lines. I'm starting to run out of water and I'm too lazy to go fill it back up. So my lines are starting to get a little bit rough there. Another little highlight on top of this. And let's call that a finished painting. I hope you guys enjoyed this painting tutorial. If you have any recommendations for future videos, leave a comment below this video and I'll add them to my list of things to paint. If you did recreate this one and you want to show it to me, you can post it on your Instagram page and tag me, the painting Stoof, so I can see it from my Instagram page. And you can also post it on my Facebook page, the painting Stoof. I'm looking forward to seeing your work. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day and happy painting. Bye bye.